good morning or good day. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues, dear guests, I'm very pleased to welcome you all in this golden hall of the Croatian Institute of History at the opening of this academic seminar about models of intellectual transfer in the period of proto modernization. And this seminar is organized within our project entitled European Roots of Modern Croatia. The project is led by our prominent researcher, Vlasta Škoger, who is also head of the Department of the History of the 19th Century. But before Vlasta says some information about this project, and before our distinguished guests from Austria and Hungary, Veronika Eszik and Hecht, deliver us their talks, let me say just a few words about our institute and maybe something about Golden Hall. So Croatian Institute of History is still the largest public research institute in the field of humanities in the Republic of Croatia. Currently, our researchers conduct 5 research projects funded by Croatian Science Foundation. This year, also, we finished one collaborative project funded by European Commission within a program Horizon 2020, and the project name was Courage, and it was about cultural opposition in the former socialist countries. This project was carried out in cooperation with more than 10 European research institutions, and everything was conducted by Center for the Humanities of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. So, bearing in mind this research experience, I strongly believe that this project, also led by our Vlasta, will yield many new valuable insights about intellectual transfers between Western and Central Europe. This seminar, I believe, hardly could be placed in a better venue than this golden hall, where pictures on the walls and all the decorations on in this hall reflect many of such transfers throughout Croatian history. From the medieval times up to the modernity, this region and Croatians were witnesses and protagonists of many cultural, economic, and intellectual transfers that undoubtedly influenced and shaped our history. But I will not speak anymore and steal your time, and I will end these introductory words with hope and wish that all the guests and participants of this seminar will enjoy staying at the Institute and staying in Zagreb. So I wish you all fruitful discussions and work. Thank you.
Dear colleagues, I would like to thank our director, Dr. Ravančić, for his welcoming words, and our colleagues, lecturers from Hungary and Austria for coming. It's a great pleasure to welcome you here in the Croatian Institute of History. I would like to thank you all for coming to the first of 7 planned scientific colloquia entitled Models and Experiences of Intellectual Transfer in the Period of Proto-Modernization, which is organized by the project European Origins of Modern Croatia, Transfer of Ideas in Political and Cultural Fields in the 18th and 19th centuries. This project is a part of scientific and research work in the Croatian Institute of History in Zagreb and is implemented in cooperation with scientists from the Faculty of Law and the Faculty of Social Sciences and Humanities of the University of Zagreb, as well as the Croatian School Museum. It's financed by the Croatian Science Foundation, covering the period from October 2018 to September 2022. Excuse me. Now I will say a few words about research group. I am principal investigator, and my co-researchers are Štefka Batinić, PhD from Croatian School Museum, Ivana Horbec, PhD, researcher from Croatian Institute of History, Mirela Krešić, associate professor from Faculty of Law of the University of Zagreb, Branko Ostajmer from Croatian Institute of History, Marina Protorka-Štimec, associate professor from Faculty of Social Sciences and Humanities of the University of Zagreb, Teodora Šek-Bernardić, PhD, researcher working here in Croatian Institute of History, Marijan Šabić, PhD, researcher from Croatian Institute of History, Unit for History of Slavonia, Sirmia and Baranja in Slavonski Brod, Jasna Turkan, PhD researcher from Croatian Institute of History, and finally Zrinko Novoselj, our PhD candidate from our institute. Now I will say a few words about projects and the main objectives of the project. Proceeding from a hypothesis that the foundations of Croatia as a modern state were laid in the 18th and long 19th centuries, the objective of the project is to research the transfer and reception of various ideas and ideological currents of European provenance in Croatia's political and cultural life, which contributed to the formation of Croatia's European identity and its transformation into a modern state. Research will focus on the influence of European ideas on the development of the parliamentary system and parliamentary culture in Croatia, as well as on laying foundations for modern public administration, the healthcare system, and the education system. The object of the analysis will also be the transfer of ideas in literature, transformation of the legal status of women, as well as reflection of the Enlightenment. Major objectives of the project are to determine models, circumstances, and reasons for the transfer and reception of ideas of European provenance in Croatia's political and cultural life during the 18th and the 19th centuries. To explore strategies of their modification and adaptation to local circumstances, to understand the reasons for and circumstances of resistance to these influences, and finally, to contribute to understanding of formation of Croatia's European identity in the broader political and cultural context. These objectives we will achieve through interdisciplinary approach in research, applying modern methodological patterns, as well as through critical analysis of archival sources and relevant literature, cooperation with scientists of related disciplines in Croatia and abroad, and by disseminating results through publications, conferences, and digital media. And just a few words about expected results. First of all, it's digital repository. It will be accessible to public through an open access to the project's website, but starting from the end of the first year of project implementation. The project website is not finished yet. The repository will comprise excerpts from various types of documents, legal and administrative documents, imperial letters, political treaties, literary and journalist works, correspondence, memoirs, diaries, etc., that document the transfer of ideas and enable the reader or researcher to understand different models and strategies of acceptance and modification of individual ideas and or resistance to these ideas. It will be possible to search the contents of the repository by full text search, by author, by keywords, and by the place and year of creation. We expect to produce many scientific papers which will be published in international and domestic journals, proceedings, collected papers, and an e-book on parliamentary procedures of the Croatian Diet, which would be accessible on project's website. Project team members will participate at scientific conferences in Croatia and abroad. And we will organize a series of scientific exchanges of views entitled Models and Experiences of Intellectual Transfer in the Period of Proto-Modernization, where distinguished foreign and domestic experts will discuss the research on the following topics: civil and political rights, minority status, parliamentary life and political culture, public health care system, development of modern education science and the school system, legal status of women in a comparative context, reflections of the Enlightenment, cultural transfers in literature. We are planning to make a final proceedings of work of all project team members, which will be in form of an e-book accessible at the project's website by the end of the project. And finally, PhD thesis which should be made by our PhD candidate Zrinko Novosel. And finally, I would like to thank our colleagues Veronika Eszik and Hecht for accepting our invitation to participate in this scientific colloquium. I would also like to thank colleague Branko Ostermer for organizing this event and Zrinko Novosel for the technical support. And finally, thank you all for coming. I am sure you will find the lectures interesting and useful. And now I'll ask colleague Ostermer to introduce our lecturers. Thank you.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear guests, I would also like to greet you, and now I would like to introduce our lecturers today. Our first lecturer is Veronika Eszik, and she, as you have already heard, comes from Budapest, where she works at the Institute of History of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. She graduated in 2011 as a French language teacher and next year as a historian, both from the Eötvös Loránd University of Budapest. In 2012, she started her PhD studies at the same university at the Department for European Historiography and Social Sciences. Her future dissertation treats the anti-modernist and/or anti-Hungarian movements emerged in sub-dualist Croatia. In September 2017, she was hired by the Hungarian Academy of Sciences as a junior researcher, and at this moment she is a member of two research teams. One is linked to the Eötvös Loránd University, and the other one, which is entitled Knowledge, Landscape, Nation and Empire, Practices of Knowing and Transforming Landscape in Hungary and the Balkans from 1850 till 1945. This team is linked to the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. Veronika Eszik participated in several conferences and published several scientific papers. Part of them refers to the topics of Croatian history. Among other, last autumn at her home institution, she held a lecture entitled Az nép kifakad a meterrendszer ellen is, a városi modernizáció kritikus percepciója a dualizmus kori Horvátországban. Or, and she will correct me if I'm wrong, the people also rose against metric system, the critical reception of the town modernization in dualist Croatia. Anyhow, her scientific interests are very close to our project. Unfortunately, we weren't aware of this last year, otherwise we would probably try to include her into our project. But we are glad that she's here today with us, and surely there will be a chance for institutional cooperation in the future. The title of Veronika Eszik lecture today is Late 19th Century Anti-Modernisms in East Central Europe.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction and also for the invitation. I'm really honored to be in such a beautiful place, and that's the first time to me, so thank you very much. I hope that my presentation about anti-modernism is going to be interesting for this project, because it's really about transfers. I tried to emphasize them. So the 19th century is, on the one side, the high time of nationalism. Less in the last 2 decades, 3 major challenges have been posed to national narratives, as recent Habsburg historiography is highly inspired by the so-called imperial turn, also by the notion of national indifference, and most recently global history attempts to to overstep the limits of the notion of national narratives. The 19th century on the other side, is a period infiltrated by an almost religious belief in one magic word, which is progress. So this is a century of unlimited idealization of civilizational and techno-scientific development, with an incredibly bright future imagined for humankind. So maybe it is also high time to challenge this second vision, and maybe it is interesting to historians to deal with the counterparts of this progress religion. Personally, I prefer the metaphoric formulation about a Promethean century. That's why I chose as an illustration Prometheus stealing the fire, which was often used by French contemporaries in the 19th century and by French historiography since then to describe the two-faced nature of this century. So yes, it seems that we have stolen the fire, but yes, it also seems that we had to pay dearly for it. As a result, my ambition is to give the voice back to alternative visions of modernity, to emancipate discourses made by those who had to pay the price for the spectacular and rapid social transformation that is often called industrialization, capitalization, modernization, and so on. So as a result, in my speech, first I'm trying to define precisely what anti-modernism is. It's going to be a rather theoretical part of my presentation. And in the second part, I'm going to display my own case studies and researches about this subject, which is going to be a less theoretical and more empirical part based on archival sources. It's rather difficult, though, to define precisely anti-modernism. The literature is getting richer and richer, but it seems that everyone uses his or her own terminology. I'm going to do the same anyway. And on formulations. So I'll follow first the definition formulated by Balázs Trencsényi and his fellow researchers at the Central European University in Budapest, actually. I'm pretty sure that you know this volume about anti-modernism. This is the Readers, a collection of sources. And this volume in question refers mainly to the interwar period, but it's going to be quite useful to me as well. So this text emphasizes right from the beginning that what we identify as anti-modernism is in a very complex and entangled relationship with modernism. As you will see, the same text can be read in both frameworks. Anti-modernism could be defined as a negative double of modernism, and B, the critic of modernism within modernism. I wanted to emphasize this duality because I'm going to show examples for both. And then we can say that anti-modernist projects were posing an internal critique of modernity, offering an at times ruthless criticism of parliamentary democracy, rationalism, individualism, and the vision of linear progress, often also rejecting legal equality. What they offered instead was various formulas of collective regeneration, and the emphasis is on collective, and restoration of socio-cultural harmony undermined by the very process of modernization. So appearing mainly in the 1890s, when classical liberalism and conservatism were both in deep crisis, and mass politics became more and more significant, anti-modernism was hunting for, according to the words of Benedict Anderson, authenticity, roots, originality, and the proper national history. Anti-modernism had various forms of expressions. One of the most frequent in East Central Europe is what Polish scholar Jerzy Jedlicki identified in his book, The Suburb of Europe, 19th century Polish approaches to Western civilization. as a constant opposition of natural and artificial development. Natural is very often called in this text also organic, which is really a key word of anti-modernism. Both have the common goal to overcome backwardness, but have very different attitudes towards Western type of industrial capitalism as a pattern, maybe, or as a model. In another book of Jedlicki, A Degenerate World, even more important to us now, the author offers an explanation that can be useful to everyone who treats questions of East Central European lands. So I quote, "The Polish disputes regarding modernity are colored by Poland's geographical and political position in Europe relative to the main centers of European culture, as well as the axiom of the defense of the native culture. In Poland and similarly situated countries of Europe, one finds that the criticisms of modernity are shaped by the attitudes towards what is foreign or alien, as well as by attitudes towards the West in general and towards its cities." So maybe that's an idea which can be very important if we think about transfers, because there are some scholars like Maria Todorova who think that this is a factor which makes the peripheries more important in the historical deployment of anti-modernism than the centers. So she claims that anti-modernism appears first in the peripheries and after in the centers, which is a very interesting retransfer of ideas that we rarely can see. So back to the cities. Another typical form of expression of anti-modernist attitudes is a strong anti-urban sentiment, blaming the city alien to the projected national specificity and being perverted, corrupt, decadent, and everything. This is something that is highly present in 19th century Croatian literature, so maybe you know more of that than me. But it is this kind of disgust from the city is in the center of my own research interests as well. The only excerpt from Croatian literature in this book is meant exactly to illustrate this phase of anti-modernism. This is from Vladimir Čerina, U gradu Cinika, in the city of Cynics. We can also recognize other typical features of anti-modernism in it, like anti-capitalism, anti-Semitism, and a certain cult of violence and conflict. I won't read that because it's quite long, but it's really a violent attack on Zagreb. And it's very interesting to see that what are the features of the capital city which are irritating, like regular streets and modern trams and things like that. We can also see that, on the contrary, the countryside is characterized as virgin-like purity. So really something that is not corrupted by modernity. Also, there is a very interesting use of the word evolution in this little excerpt. So the characteristic of late 19th century agrarian societies, that political and economic oppression was almost every time also identified with the aggression of the city towards the countryside, is such an omnipresent phenomenon in Croatia also that Mark Biondic, biographer of Stjepan Radic, even called it the most typical feature of 19th century Croatian society, which is maybe an exaggeration, but can be interesting to us. To my own definition, however, anti-modernism is an attitude that is, unlike the illusion of that progress was going to cure all the miseries of humans, from poverty to moral inferiority, and also unlike the illusion that progress is a neutral process that we can use in a bad or in a good way. So anti-modernist attitudes recognize that the achievements of modernizations are a means of power, and from the moment when it is recognized that access to modernity And the ability of further modernization is a question of dominance, power relations, politics and privileges. The critical attitudes towards modernity gains momentum and gets very different stakes. In this case, resilience against modernizing ambitions or modernizing ideas is more than a simple fear of losing traditional lifestyle or losing traditional values. It's rather the expression of the refusal of certain power relations. And of course, this resistance can be very easily interpreted in an ethnic or national way when the power is displaced in other countries, let's say, for example, from Zagreb to Budapest. From this perspective, a number of seemingly irrational actions suddenly make sense. I will return to that later because this is a key moment of one of the case studies I have done. So, as a scholar interested in social history, I was wondering how we can define, how we can grab the group of those people who express anti-modernist attitudes. So who are these people exactly who prefer this way than the other, way more popular belief in the curing force of progress? It is indeed an intriguing social historical question, as neither of the usual classifications of society help in our case. I'm sorry for this very unprofessional slide, but I just wanted to say that if we imagine a classical hierarchy from little peasantry to aristocracy, which is the first model, it won't help us at all because we can find anti-modernist groups from each layer. Peasantry, as in the Romanian and the Croatian case, can be easily mobilized to express the bitter experience of the capitalist change. But take the German example, not the Austrian one, but German, according to the researches of András Vári, the strongest and most consequent anti-modernist cluster is exactly the association of the big landowners, the so-called Bund der Landwirte, which expressed doubts regarding the self-regulating capacity of market, and also criticized the moral foundations of a world that is based on rivalry and competition. Very interestingly, in Hungary, the same social cluster having similar problems and similar agrarian solutions, and also very much under the influence of the German theorists, so they did not have a real anti-modernist background. The Hungarian agrarians wanted to stay away from politics and accepted the reality of global capitalism. Their association proposed only minor changes in the economic system. We don't really have an explanation to this. Maybe it is an important